Before the global economy halted in the spring of 2026, the international energy supply chain operated on a highly centralized architecture. The system relied heavily on the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman processed approximately 20 million barrels of oil every single day. This diagram models global energy throughput. Exactly 1/5 of the world's daily oil and liquefied natural gas supply converged strictly on this single maritime node. With such immense volume flowing through a solitary corridor, any disruption would outweigh the capacity of standard market buffers. The Strait of Hormuz operated as a structural single point of failure for the entire global macroeconomic system. On February 28th, military hostilities broke out. Iranian forces deployed heavily armed warships to establish a physical blockade, immediately severing this vital shipping lane. The immediate mathematical consequence was severe. 20% of the world's energy supply was instantaneously removed from global markets. By examining market data from the first half of 2026, we can track how this localized closure entirely bypassed standard economic safety nets. The data traces a clear path from a forced, highly inefficient logistical realignment straight through to a permanent structural reduction in global energy demand. The event revealed that tightly coupled supply chains lacked the elasticity to absorb a Tier 1 choke point closure through organic market adjustments alone. In early March, the financial markets registered a violent and immediate response to the physical blockade. Vital energy exports were immediately trapped inside the Gulf. The blockade stranded millions of barrels originating from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq, and Qatar. This line chart tracks the price of Brent crude during the crisis. The pricing contagion was immediate, causing the benchmark to surge past $120 per barrel within the first week of March. While commodity traders dealt with the financial shock, the physical reality on the water was actively deteriorating by late April. The traditional supply chains experienced systemic collapse. The waterway became a massive bottleneck, resulting in a backlog of approximately 2,000 stranded commercial vessels. The initial phase of this crisis was an absolute physical paralysis of regional maritime export infrastructure. This paralysis forced the global shipping industry into a radical reconfiguration of maritime traffic, as traditional routes were completely abandoned. Carriers had to select a logistical alternative that would bypass the Middle East entirely, regardless of the distance. The entire energy transport sector was forced south. The Cape of Good Hope became the mandatory southern detour for all affected vessels. This route map compares the abandoned Gulf path to the new southern detour. Diverting around Africa added 10 days to transit times, consuming $1 million in extra fuel per voyage. Carriers passed this downward, raising both base freight rates and fuel surcharges. Diverting traffic was never a true solution to the blockade. It functioned as a mandatory, compounding tax applied sequentially to every step of the global supply chain. That compounding tax rapidly flowed downstream, translating logistical inflation directly into the consumer economies. Europe faced a specific and severe vulnerability. The suspension of Qatari liquefied natural gas imports proved catastrophic for a continent heavily reliant on specialized shipments. Industrial sectors absorbed extreme financial penalties, with manufacturing facilities across the UK and the EU facing localized energy surcharges of up to 30%. Beyond the manufacturing slowdown, the supply shock triggered dire humanitarian consequences across developing nations. The simultaneous increase in localized food, fuel, and transport costs shattered economic stability in highly vulnerable regions. The resulting human toll was staggering. United Nations estimates concluded that these combined pressures pushed over 32 million additional people into poverty. A highly localized maritime blockade translated mechanically into systemic industrial suffocation and widespread global poverty. By June of 2026, the energy market began showing signs of a fragile, uneven recovery. However, this stability was entirely artificial. It did not stem from natural market equilibrium, but from extreme government interventions. To offset the missing 20% of global supply, nations aggressively tapped into their strategic petroleum reserves. This text from the official crisis report confirms just how heavily those safety nets were drained, noting that OECD government inventories reached their lowest levels since 1990. The mid-year market stability was a dangerous facade, funded entirely by emergency stockpiles, leaving the global economy with zero buffer to absorb secondary shocks. The prolonged exposure to high prices and sustained logistical friction forced a final, permanent consequence on consumer behavior. The market experienced acute demand contraction. Instead of simply waiting for energy prices to normalize, the global economy actively destroyed its own need for the constrained resource. This dual-axis chart illustrates the exact scale of the shift. While OECD inventory levels dropped, global oil demand contracted by a staggering 1.1 million barrels per day. Following the crisis, nations view their reliance on vulnerable maritime choke points as a major security liability. The ultimate legacy of the 2026 blockade was a shift in global strategy. By highlighting the vulnerability of central choke points, the crisis accelerated the transition toward distributed energy architectures that do not rely on a single maritime corridor.